I'm sure you probably understand the concept of tough love, and I'm guessing you've probably also experienced it. You maybe even shown it a number of times before. Typically, we think of tough love in the realm of discipline, but it's not just there. You also see it in the realm of training. Teachers and coaches that know that a particular student or athlete is particularly gifted, they will tend to push them extra hard and be extra hard on them. And it's not to beat them down, it's rather to build them up and to help them realize their potential and to be their best. Now, if you take that concept, which is fairly easy to understand, and keep that in mind when you look at this lesson we're going to examine from Matthew chapter 15, 21 to 28, think of tough love for the purpose of training and building someone up. I think that helps us understand this rather challenging and interesting and unique lesson here that Jesus gives us today between Jesus and the Phoenician woman. I'll read that for you. Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came out to him, crying out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly." Jesus did not answer a word. So his disciples came to him and urged him, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." Then he answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel." The woman came and knelt before him. "Lord, help me," she said. He replied, "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs." "Yes, it is, Lord," she said. "Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus said to her, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." And her daughter was healed at that very moment. Now, I think it's interesting because only twice in the gospel accounts of Jesus' earthly ministry do we hear him praise someone for a great faith. And none of them were insiders, so to speak, from the people of Israel. One was a Roman centurion who came to him on behalf of a paralyzed servant. Again, someone coming to him on behalf of someone else. And the other is this Canaanite woman who came to Jesus begging for him to help her daughter. Now, certainly, when you look at all those you would expect to have great faith, like the religious leaders of Israel, for example, never praised for their faith from Jesus because, they had no faith in him as their Lord and Savior. They blatantly denied Jesus. They thought that their works would save them. But when it comes to the disciples too, those he chose to be his inner circle and to send out there to the world, they were never praised for having a strong faith. In fact, 6 times in the Gospel of Matthew alone, they are rebuked for having a weak faith. "Oh, you of little faith," Jesus called them over and over again. Yet this lowly, distraught, outsider, Gentile woman who was a pile of nerves and screaming at the top of her lungs is held up by Jesus as an example of great faith. And that's beyond a high honor coming from the Son of God himself. And instead of just granting her request, this is where we see the master teacher in action here. Jesus patiently drew out of her 3 attributes of a great faith. It is trusting, it is persistent, and it is humble. And notice how he brings these qualities out of her, because she came to him right away trusting that he could and would help her. It's right there in how she addresses him. She calls him the Messiah, the Son of David. And she was trusting that he had the ability and the power to drive out the demon that was torturing her daughter. Now, Jesus said nothing, and he knew that she would pass the test and not give up on her faith. So he gave her an opportunity to show persistence as well. It's interesting, the Greek tenses here show off how she was just like screaming and just kept on persistently crying out after him, begging him, to the point where the disciples were totally annoyed and sick of hearing this woman and all her noise. And so they kept urging Jesus to send her off. But she, who no doubt heard that, did not give up. Then Jesus draws out of her humility. He says, I was only sent to the lost sheep of Israel. And we're told in response that she knelt before him, but the word's actually stronger than that. It's to prostrate oneself, like she felt collapsed completely at his feet. Maybe she was clasping his ankles as well. And she held on to that trust, and she held on to that persistence, and now she was showing humility. She didn't snap back, I'm just as good as the Israelites, what are you talking about? Or turn around at that moment and walk away, being offended and being upset. No. She humbly begged, Lord, help me. Then with Jesus' final statement, I think he brings the absolute best out of her. When he says it's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs, that doesn't sound like something Jesus would say to this poor humble woman who was suffering so greatly. It just seems so out of character. But her response, and again, he knew this, he pulled this out of her, is absolutely striking. She says literally just, yes, Lord. Still acknowledging him as Lord and the one in control, but that word yes. She's saying, I don't deserve equal rights. I don't deserve your kindness and help. In fact, she's saying, I don't mind being treated like a lapdog while the Israelites are treated as children. And she goes on to say, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. Wow, she never gave up. She never questioned his power to help. She never complained that Israel had first place and she was left in second or third or who knows what place. And she didn't complain that she wasn't born into the chosen nation and was treated unjustly. What did this woman want? All she wanted was a crumb. All she wanted was mercy. And it was for her daughter. And Jesus masterfully and lovingly and patiently brought these qualities of great faith out in her. It may have seemed harsh, but he had her spiritual best interest at heart. He granted her request. You know the thing with Jesus too. When it comes to Jesus, there really are no such things as crumbs. What did he do? He gave her everything that she wanted and showed his power and concern and love. He gave this woman personal one-on-one attention, drawing the best out of her, and then grants her request, and then holds her up as an example of great faith. How do you think the disciples felt? I mean, they were the ones who were telling Jesus what to do. That's not humility. And telling Jesus to send her away because they were annoyed by her and they didn't want her around. And they must have kept in mind when he said that too, how many times Jesus called them oligon piste, which means you have tiny little faith, his disciples, his chosen band. Must have stung. Well, how do you think you and I would stand up next to this Canaanite woman? When I look at this text, when I look at this lesson, I think she certainly puts me to shame, and I think she probably does put you to shame as well. I mean, do you always trust that Jesus can help you in any and every situation? Do you actually believe that incurable illness that the doctors say they could do nothing about, that Jesus actually does have the power to take that away too? Do you believe he can actually make a Christian out of that stubborn, unbelieving relative that you love so much but just wants nothing to do with Jesus? What about the small things? We might think that Jesus is capable of the really big things and maybe ask him about that, but do you think that he actually can and does care about, I don't know, your chapped lips or your sunburn or your emotional pain or relationship pain? Because he does care, and he actually does have time for things like that. He tells us that. He even knows the number of hairs on our head. He knows absolutely everything about us. He's God. He knows everything, and he does care about the big things, small things, about all things that you care about. She certainly got us beat when it comes to persistence too. I mean, she kept crying out and just never gave up. And I look at a lesson like this and I think, man, I look at my prayer life. How often do I just give up? I mean, if I can find time to pray at all, and I don't pray nearly as much as I should, it seems like I might ask once or twice and then just maybe assume the answer is no and say, oh, well, and move on and deal with whatever. But Jesus told us he wants us to keep on praying, he wants us to keep on asking, whether the answer is yes or no, or maybe not right at the moment. He wants us to have that persistent attitude in prayer, to never give up. And she was persistent I don't think I would say that I am. And am I really humble like this woman was? Do I graciously accept my role and place in this world? Or do I sometimes complain that things are just so unfair and I don't have as much as those people and they get all the good treatment and I get treated as second-class citizens? It's not fair. And do I look at others and want what they have? And do I humbly thank God for the hyperabundance of blessings that He's given me? Or do I grumble about the crumbs that I get when I feel like I should have a bigger slice of the cake? It's so easy to fail to see the abundance and to complain about what we might think are the crumbs. Looking at her example of a great faith might actually make us feel kind of crummy, pardon the pun. But Mark Twain once said, few things are harder to put up with than the annoyance of a good example. And I think when you take a good, honest, hard look at yourself, and I know when I do at myself, it's really hard to see the unbelief and the weakness where trust belongs, and to see the laziness and the apathy where persistence belongs, and to see the pride and ingratitude where humility is supposed to be. But thankfully, we have a real solution to the problem. And trying to be better and trying to follow her example better and trying to be better in this area of trust and persistence and humility is not the answer. The answer is really only found in the cross of Christ. That's the only solution. So what do? We go to the cross and then we find all of our sin, all of our unbelief, our pride and weakness is completely taken care of. Each and every failure is taken away. He poured out His mercy upon us. He gave us not just the crumbs, He gave us His very life. He takes care of your biggest problem, the one with eternal consequences. And not only does He take all of the ugliness away, Jesus turns around and gives us everything that we lack. He just does that. And look at Him. He trusted His Father completely, right through the crucifixion. My God, why have you forsaken me? Still calling out to Him still trusting in Him right through the bonds of hell until He said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And He takes that perfect record of trust and He just gives it to you by faith. It's credited to you by faith. Same thing with His persistence. I mean, you look at the hours that Jesus spent in prayer. Sometimes He would go up in the mountain and spend all night praying. No sleep. Persistence in prayer. And you know how He sweat drops of blood there in the Garden of Gethsemane. That was persistence while the disciples all slept. And He takes His perfect record of persistence and He gives it to you. And notice His pure humility. Almighty King of the universe, who designed human beings right down to the smallest detail. By the power of His word it came to be, and He was silent as they spit in His face, as they mocked and ridiculed Him and tortured Him and nailed His hands and feet. Humility, wow. And He takes His humility and He gives it to you. That's what I mean by a real solution. The real solution is a cross. And so guess what He makes you into be? You have truly become, and so have I, because of the cross, an example of great faith. You get to go out there and show the world what it looks like, what He has made you to be, what He has declared you to be. You get to show people how you trust in God in all circumstances and how persistent you are in prayer and worship and doing what is good and what is right even when it gets you more trouble, and how humble you are even when treated poorly. And in fact, when we show the world Christ-like humility and trust and persistence, they might feel pretty crummy next to you, but that's not the end of it. Then you can point them to the cross, because it's really not yours, it's His flowing through you, and you could show them all that Jesus did for us and all that He gives us. We know it wasn't easy to live out this text. It wasn't easy for that Canaanite woman to undergo Jesus' version of tough love, but the results were worth it. And He brought out the best in her. And He held her up as a great example for all of us. And He actually does the same for you and me. He gives us challenges and burdens and suffering and struggle. He gives us His version of tough love in your life, in your own way. And He does that not to crush us, not to beat us down, but to build us up and to draw out of us the best. When he fails, he just brings us back to the cross once again, and he sends us away forgiven, redeemed, and restored. He fills us up and turns us into examples of great faith for the world around us right now. And that's what they need. The world just as he did for that Canaanite woman. He's there for anyone when we fall at his feet and cry for mercy. He's there to help.